December 17, 1944, dawned cold and grey over the Belgian village of Honsfeld. SS-Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch of his Tiger tank as the massive Maybach engine coughed once, sputtered, and died. The metallic clang echoed through the pre-dawn darkness like a death knell for German ambitions. His driver, Unterscharführer Weber, frantically attempted to restart the 700-horsepower engine that had carried them through the opening hours of Operation Wacht and Riem. Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies in the Ardennes. Nothing. The fuel gauge read empty. Herr Obersturmbannführer. Weber called up from his compartment, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank is also dry, around Peiper's command tank. The most powerful armoured spearhead the Wehrmacht had assembled for the Ardennes offensive sat motionless in the morning mist. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralysed by empty fuel tanks. Through the lifting fog, Peiper could see the abandoned American positions ahead at Honsfeld, a critical supply depot for the US 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled so hastily they'd left fires still burning in oil drums and coffee, still steaming in metal cups. But what caught Peiper's attention like a vision from the gods of war were the rows upon rows of jerry cans. Thousands of them in distinctive olive drab, lined up with military precision across the depot. As his adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruel, pried open one can and sniffed, the sharp scent of high-octane gasoline filled the air. The mathematics were staggering 50,000 gallons, enough to fuel Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe for the push to the Meuse River, enough to potentially change the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months. Yet as Peiper stood among this bounty, watching his men frantically pour American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind what Germany would guard with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany hadn't just miscalculated, it had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy. 6 months before Peiper's discovery, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had presented the Führer with a report that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. The Lunar Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 tons by September. The Burgius hydrogenation plants at Pilitz, Bleckhammer, and Brex were operating at less than 10% capacity. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat that German leadership refused to acknowledge. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic production and captured Romanian fields, managed 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was attempting to wage mechanized warfare with horse-drawn logistics while America was drowning its armies in petroleum abundance. Major Friedrich Seemann of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, but only half was actually delivered due to transportation problems. The German High Command was betting the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy that revealed terminal weakness rather than strength. The Americans, meanwhile, had constructed a petroleum pipeline system across France called PLUTO, a pipeline under the ocean, and the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system that delivered 500 tons of supplies daily to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day while receiving 1.4 million gallons. They were accumulating reserves while fighting. Joachim Peiper was not a fool. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, a veteran of the Eastern Front where he had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was more precious than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe had been designated the Schorpunkt, the decisive point of the entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14th, 2 days before the offensive began, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was brutally honest. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." The fuel allocation for Kampfgruppe Peiper was 35,000 gallons, enough for 50 miles of combat operations. The distance to the Meuse was 65 miles. The mathematics of failure were built into the plan from the beginning. The contrast with American operations could not have been starker. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the US 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Peiper's starting position, recorded in his unit diary, received fuel resupply 8,000 gallons. Third delivery this week, storage tanks already at capacity. When the German artillery barrage opened Operation Wacht am Rhein at 05:30 hours on December 16th, it used more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. But even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Peiper's column began moving at 700 a.m., already behind schedule. The roads, which appeared as highways on German maps, were narrow country lanes, many unpaved. Within hours, traffic jams developed as vehicles designed for the Russian steppes struggled through the Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, Peiper's first objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. 18 men who held up the most powerful German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the delay, Peiper's vehicles sat idling, burning precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17th, Peiper's column had covered 20 miles and consumed 40% of their fuel. At this rate, they would run dry before reaching the halfway point to the Meuse. The American supply depot at Honsfeld wasn't even a primary facility. It was classified as a Class 3B depot, a temporary fuel station for the 99th Infantry Division. Yet what Peiper found there exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German panzer division. Hauptsturmbannführer Hans Gruel later testified, "I found pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gallons of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, extending for perhaps 200 meters. The Americans had not even attempted to destroy them. The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher. German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines in the Tiger tanks, were designed for 74 octane fuel. The American gasoline was actually too good, causing engine problems in several German vehicles. As Peiper's men refueled, they made more discoveries that shattered their understanding of the war they were fighting. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found shipping manifests in the depot office. Having worked in his father's import business before the war, he could read English. The papers indicated this fuel had been shipped from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 400 miles to Honsfeld. The journey of over 6,000 miles had taken less than 6 weeks. I showed the papers to Obersturmbannführer Peiper, Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant. Private Ernst Bauer found a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15th, just 2 days old. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A single pipeline delivering more fuel daily than Kampfgruppe Peiper would use in the entire offensive. To comprehend the shock of Peiper's discovery, one must understand Germany's fuel situation by late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had reduced synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft for lack of aviation fuel. Pilot training had been cut from 250 flight hours to 60 hours. The German Navy's surface fleet had effectively ceased operations. U-boats were fitted with snorkels to conserve diesel by running on batteries longer. On the home front, German civilians had not seen private automobile traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo investigated black market theft of individual litres. Farmers were returning to horse-drawn ploughs. Meanwhile, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone produced more petroleum than all of German-occupied Europe. American refineries were operating at such capacity that Standard Oil was experimenting with new petroleum byproducts simply because they had excess crude. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Honsfeld, Peiper's column surged forward. They reached Beuilingen by noon on December 17th, capturing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and most importantly, maps showing other American fuel depots in the area. But the maps revealed a disturbing truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot. The US First Army alone had 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper pushed on to Ligneuville, where his forces would commit the Normandy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners. Even this war crime was connected to fuel desperation. Peiper later claimed he could not spare gasoline to transport prisoners. By evening on December 17th, Peiper's spearhead reached Stavelot, site of a major American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons. Here was enough fuel to guarantee reaching the Meuse. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received warning of the German approach. His orders were simple: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelot depot contained two 189,000 gallons of gasoline in jerry cans stacked across 15 acres. At 16:30 hours on December 17th, as Peiper's advance guard approached, Captain Brewster gave the order. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks and distributed white phosphorus grenades. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade. The explosion was immediate and tremendous, he recalled. A wall of fire shot up maybe 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to find a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The fire would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Unterscharführer Weber described the scene. The Obersturmbannführer stood on his tank turret watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers were destroying fuel dumps rather than risk capture. At Troyes Ponce, 1.1 million gallons burned. At Spa, 2.5 million gallons were destroyed in total. Americans deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the first week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire operation. The ability to casually destroy millions of gallons was rooted in a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express had delivered 4,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks operating round the clock. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily. The operation itself burned more fuel than German Army Group B received monthly. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service employed 230 truck companies operating on color-coded routes. The system delivered 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for 1st Army, recorded on December 18th. Fuel receipts yesterday, 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued, 1,623,000 gallons. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the impossibility of the German position became clear. At Chenox, they captured another depot, 5,000 gallons consumed in 3 hours of combat. Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gallons per mile in battle. Panthers burned 1.5 gallons per mile. In the difficult Ardennes terrain, consumption increased by 40%. Hauptmann Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By noon on December 18th, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit." The Americans, monitoring German radio traffic through ultra-intercepts, knew Peiper's fuel situation. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units, enemy critically short of fuel, destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47s through 316 sorties delivering supplies to Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. Americans were flying more fuel to a surrounded garrison than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. By December 19th, as Peiper's forces engaged defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had become critical. Tanks were being abandoned with empty fuel tanks, rather than from battle damage. Peiper consolidated his remaining fuel, perhaps 8,000 gallons, enough for one engagement or retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were preparing for January operations. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland requested 245 million gallons for the coming month. The request was approved without discussion. On December 20th, Peiper received a radio message: fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue with available resources. Peiper called his commanders together. Sturmbannführer Werner Poetschik was blunt. We have fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away. According to Hauptsturmherr Grul's testimony, the Obersturmbannführer said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization was spreading throughout German ranks. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, "When I learned Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons, rather than risk our capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." Colonel Friedrich von der Heydt, captured December 23rd, told interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We measure by the lighter. How can we fight such abundance?" By December 21st, Peiper was surrounded at La Gleize, his tanks immobile. American forces surrounding him, the 30th Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne, 3rd Armored, had a combined fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons for December 21st alone. Peiper had perhaps 1,000 gallons. Private First Class Richard McKinney wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for tanks." On the night of December 23rd to 24th, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 remained operational but immobilized. These were destroyed with remaining ammunition rather than fall into American hands. Oberstfreiter Heinz Goals described the scene. "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, maybe 200 gallons total. The Obersturmbannführer personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment destroyed by empty fuel tanks. Of 5,000 men who began with Kampfgruppe Peiper, approximately 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and discovered the truth about Allied logistics that would haunt German commanders for the remainder of the war. News of Peiper's discoveries spread rapidly through German command. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports on captured American supplies. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The Field Marshal read the quantities twice: 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, 8 million destroyed rather than captured. He said, "We are not fighting the same war." When Hitler was informed on December 28th, he refused to accept reality. Speer wrote, "Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda." When shown photographs of burning Stavelot, he claimed it was Hollywood effects. But the lower ranks understood. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote his wife, "Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks like we march. This war is lost." The fuel crisis was symptomatic of a larger truth. By 1944, America produced 50% of world manufacturing. A new aircraft every 5 minutes, a ship daily, a tank every 7 minutes. Petroleum production statistics were overwhelming: United States, 1.8 billion barrels, Soviet Union, 110 million barrels, Germany S including synthetic, 33 million barrels, Japan 2.6 million barrels. The Axis combined produced less than 2% of American petroleum. Every major German offensive after 1942 had been constrained by fuel shortages. Every American offensive was supported by abundance German planners couldn't conceive. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recorded a revealing incident on December 27th. A logistics officer reported weather had reduced fuel deliveries to only 500,000 gallons daily. There was concern until someone noted this exceeded Germany's total offensive allocation. German Padoos from the Ardennes were more shocked by American waste than firepower. Seeing GS discard half-eaten rations or use gasoline for heating shattered morale more than artillery. Oberst Gustav Reichhelm told interrogators, "We knew your production numbers abstractly, but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made them real. Every German who saw your casual abundance knew the war was hopeless." The psychological impact undermined German racial superiority narratives. How could decadent Americans possess such wealth while the master race scraped for necessities? During the Nuremberg trials, German leaders consistently cited logistics, particularly fuel, as decisive. Field Marshal Keitel testified or had operational superiority 1940 to 1941. By 1944, we couldn't move forces for lack of fuel while Americans moved armies like chess pieces. Peiper, tried for the Malmedy massacre, offered revealing testimony. Every decision after December 17th was influenced by fuel shortage. We couldn't maneuver, pursue, or retreat effectively. Americans moved freely while we counted litters. General Heinz Guderian wrote, "When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, meaning everything to him but nothing to Americans, the war was over." The story resonates because it represents the moment when industrial warfare reached its logical conclusion. Wars were won by production statistics, not warrior courage. The romantic notion of warfare died in the Ardennes among empty fuel tanks. Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, Allied Tabax's production ratios exceeded 5:1 in major categories. In petroleum, it approached 50:1. These advantages couldn't be overcome by superior training or tactics. America produced 324 750 aircraft during the war, Germany 119 871. Americans built 8 410 tanks, Germany 46 857. But most tellingly, America refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while Germany scraped together 33 million barrels. As Peiper's men slipped through American lines on foot on December 24th, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks and 177 other vehicles, the magnitude crystallized. They had captured 50,000 gallons, seemingly miraculous, only to learn it was meaningless to an enemy who could burn millions. Unterscharf Herr Weber reflected in 1975. That morning at Honsfeld, finding American fuel, we celebrated like winning the lottery. By evening, learning about Stavelot burning, we understood we'd already lost. Americans had so much they could destroy what we'd died to possess. The 50,000 gallons was less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, less than the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours, a rounding error in Allied daily consumption. Major General J. Lawton Collins later wrote, "Germans' desperate attempts to capture fuel revealed their miscalculation. They assumed we valued fuel as they did, as irreplaceable. They couldn't comprehend we had so much we could burn millions rather than risk tactical disadvantage." Operation Watt and Rhine failed through the immutable mathematics of industrial warfare. The offensive consumed approximately 2.8 million gallons, 40% from captured supplies. During the same period, Americans consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft. But most devastating was the loss of illusions. Every German witnessing American abundance understood Germany wasn't fighting a war, but participating in its own execution. Joachim Peiper survived, imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes. On July 14, 1976, he was murdered at his French home by unknown assailants, but in 1967, he told historian Henry Mahl, finding that Depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered impossibility. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, logistics supersedes tactics. Production overwhelms courage. Abundance defeats dedication. The German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained and more experienced. It didn't matter. Americans were backed by an industrial machine that could waste more than Germany could produce. This truth was encoded in every jerry can at Honsfeld, every gallon burned at Stavelot, every pipeline across France. Wars between industrial powers would be won by factories and refineries, not brilliant generals. Colonel Trevor Dupuy calculated that in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by 67 pounds of supplies daily. Each German received 13 pounds. Americans complained about waste. Germans would have considered American waste unimaginable abundance. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at Le Glaise. The museum displays Peiper's Tiger tank, still positioned where it ran out of fuel on December 23, 1944. Former Unterschaft Herr Karl Wertmann stood beside the tank with former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division. "We always wondered why you stopped," Anderson said. "We thought it was tactical." Wertmann laughed bitterly. "We stopped because the tanks were empty. We burned millions to keep it from us. How could we fight that?" Anderson was quiet, then said, "I never knew you were that short. We had so much we never thought about it." That exchange captured December 1944's truth. One side measured by the gallon, the other by millions. One fought for each jerry can, the other burned oceans. The outcome was predetermined by industrial mathematics that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. The Tiger tank sits in Le Glaise's museum, fuel gauge empty, a monument to the moment when tactical excellence met logistical reality and lost. Visitors ask why such powerful tanks were abandoned. The answer remains simple: no fuel. In that empty gauge lies the story of how Germany discovered it was fighting not just a war, but impossibility itself.